So today we are going to talk about thinking, or as Kataronics call it, also geometry. So thinking in Kataronics is about geometry and awareness of form, or awareness of logic, what is mechanically present in reality, like what is logically true versus false kind of idea. Okay. So yeah, it's kind of about the blueprints of reality in a way. You know, when we see these different thinker types, they are very concerned with what is actually true, or as they often say, what is actually objectively true in a way, because they kind of try to find this structure or logic in things. How does it actually work? What is the blueprint of this thing? How does it work? That is kind of the thinking function, is the kind of perception of this phenomena, and also you could also say the like interest in that phenomena. So yeah, it's actually kind of I've written here toroidal field and dielectric field, and the only reason I kind of wrote that is because when I had my Kundalini awakening, actually I felt this toroidal field around me, like it was like an electromagnetic field, the same shape and like the same movement as an electromagnetic field. And for me, that was actually a surprise, because I'm one of those persons or personalities that is less aware of how things actually work in the like strict logical sense, right? So for me, that was something new, and when I had this spiritual experience, actually for me it was kind of weird. Kind of, I didn't expect that spirituality was logical in the first place, if that makes sense. It's kind of like my feeling function didn't really value this part of spirituality, if that makes sense. So to me, it was very, very surprising that when I had this experience, it wasn't, at least in this experience in particular, it wasn't like fantasy and imagination and stuff like that. It was actually just this toroidal field coming around me, which is very kind of in the logic dimension, right, of what is actually true or not. And yeah, I think these people are very into understanding how things works, rather than kind of they kind of don't want to assume so much that stuff is magical and stuff. They kind of want to have this they have this assumption that there's always a logic behind something. If it's a miracle or magic, it's always tied to some sort of logic. That is kind of very often the perspective of these people, thinking people. And I'm actually not sure if that is accurate or not, but I think at least it's partially true, right? If there is magic and like kind of a living essence that doesn't have any base in the logical forms, if that is true, I think still the logic is kind of a part of that. It's kind of I see it kind of like thinking and feeling to be yin and yang, that you have like the mechanical aspects is as real as the living and magical aspects of reality, in a way. That is just my view anyway. It could be that everything is mechanical, and that there is a blueprint to everything in reality. But I think I see it more like a yin yang thing, personally. Anyway, okay, so yeah, so there's like these thinking people are very concerned with hierarchies and systems, and like logical systems, how things should work together, kind of like an industry in a way. How does an industry mechanically work together to produce an outcome or an effect in a way? And we can see this like in the physical body, like all the organs we have in our physical body, like how are they functioning mechanically and working together to make this species that we call human, for example. Because that's kind of also an industry in a way. Yeah, so for example, chemistry also in the body. That's also an example of understanding this mechanism behind how things work, right? If you feel this motion and that, and when you're sleepy and stuff, what happens with the chemistry in the body, and what does it do, kind of things. And we can actually also trace this back to older spirituality too, which is that kind of because like in my far past, I kind of struggled to see, I didn't see thinking as something spiritual. Predominantly to me, like thinking looked like something non-spiritual to me anyway. But I've realized later that this also can be seen as spiritual. So you have sacred geometry is a very, very kind of talked about in the esoteric traditions and stuff. And you see all these thinking personalities that have metaphysics or intuition as a part of their personality. They are very often or more likely to be interested in such as sacred geometry or for example, if you have an INTJ, they may kind of, if they want to explore spirituality, they could often go like explore the geometry of the spiritual nature, or how geometry emerges, for example, from the like more divine place. So to an INTJ, for example, I think they see kind of more like there is logic beyond all of this logic that we have in this world, but like you have the you kind of have it's kind of like scripting a Mario game, right? You have all the logic in the Mario game, which is the reality that we belong to in a way, and you have all the logic that made the Mario game through scripting, right? So the logic in the Mario game is more like, oh, if you jump on this box, you get this mushroom, or this if you gather these coins, this will happen, stuff like that. That's the logic within the game, as a part of the sensory virtual reality in a way. But how I understand like very deep thinker, intuitive people nowadays is more like they actually see like, no, there is a logic beyond that as well. It's just that that's the kind of logic that appears on the surface reality in a way. That's kind of at least what I get from thinkers such as Donald Hoffman, and also other INTJs who have this very kind of logical approach to reality. Even actually, I can think of ENTPs too. INTPs, sorry, were kind of still like they don't have very much emphasis, like much belief in this idea of a personal divinity. They have like this more belief of an impersonal divinity that has like this mechanical ways to operate, essentially. And either they ignore the idea of a living divinity that kind of responds to prayers and stuff like that. Even they ignore it, or they just are not confident enough to talk about it in a way a lot as much. So they kind of, when they study spirituality, they are very into the what's the logic behind this. That is kind of that's kind of how I see it. Yeah. Okay, so you have so thinking to me is not about achievement or effectiveness, which is very normal that we look at thinking this way in other types of Myers-Briggs or typology. But in my opinion, both achievements and effectiveness is more like a byproduct of thinking. So when you have very good thinking, you can actually more easily kind of get to that achievement or effectiveness in a way. Because let's see, if you have, I'm probably going to talk more about it, but if you have like this logical overview of how things work, you can make something. You can see like on the different competence that you have, and you can use them to achieve something or get this like more effective way to solve a problem in a way. It's kind of like making a medicine to solve something, or well, not the best example, but like it's kind of like when you know all the logic behind something, you know the most effective decision in relationship to the logic, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. So yeah, and I think it's also about having logical creations. So for example, if you want to script a game, for example, or making a computer or some other technology, you gotta have a logical baseline for the creation, or else you won't really be able to create it, right? At least not on your own. If you want to be able to create it on your own, you gotta have the logical and rational capacity to understand how something works. And the same goes for buildings. Yeah, and even as I said, I think the same goes for like scripting virtual realities. So I think if we see this more from a divinity perspective, there is a logic behind how they create a reality, and how that reality is going to function. It's like what's the physics engine of the reality? Just like there is a physics engine of, for example, Unity, which you can create games in. And that's just an idea, so let's just entertain it. But that's just an idea. I'm basically trying to say logic is probably real also behind the apparently real reality, right? Okay. So we have basically we have a perception of inanimate or abiotic components of the world. So what it means is like you have this ability to see, you have the ability to see the world in a way that is not living, but that is kind of dead in a way, that doesn't have any living reason behind things, but there is a mechanical reason behind things, or a logical structure behind things. That's kind of how I see the thinking perception. That's the it's one of our kind of psychic faculties that we can choose to use. If we want to see something as an object, we can choose to use it. Yeah. Yeah, and it's also the ability to reverse engineer something. So if I have built a Mario game, a thinking person can be able to reverse engineer what I did logically to make that game happen. And that's kind of what science kind of tries to do with reality, right? It tries to kind of reverse engineer how reality is put together, right? And that is kind of another motivation that I see a lot in thinker types. And also they also kind of That's kind of a side note anyway, but they also kind of like to, often in relationships, because oftentimes they don't really know what to do in a relationship. So oftentimes they actually prefer to fix things for the other person, because maybe the other person isn't as well as good in geometry and logic, and then they have this, if they can help that person by using their own logic and understanding of logic, that can make them feel worthy and valued, if that makes sense. So it's kind of that's also very typical for thinking personalities, to be like this handy man, kind of doing things for their partner and making sure that everything is fine with the structure and the logical components, in a sense, like helping people, understanding what logical opportunities they have, like in the industry, in how society works in a mechanical way, how are their body functioning, how does biology mechanically function, and what should you do to keep yourself healthy and have the right vitamins and so forth, right? That's kind of a very thinking approach to caring, if that makes sense, because that's kind of what the thinking person often feels most confident and competent in. Yeah, so that's kind of just a side note. How are they helping people through this function? Okay, so thinking plus sensing is therefore kind of physics and science. So physics is kind of the sensory part, right? How does the reality that we are familiar with work, like the time-space reality, essentially, and all the components with that, probably gravity and all those things, are kind of the how does the sensory reality function in the thinking or geometry or mechanical sense? What's the blueprint? How does it work? But when we actually couple thinking with intuition instead, we actually start to have more like a phenomenon like quantum physics and theory, like, or quantum physics, right? That is kind of, it's kind of maybe even between these two phenomena, but like intuition, as I have said earlier in my theory, is kind of intuition is kind of metaphysics. So quantum physics is kind of the bridge into metaphysics. That's my take on this. And when you have thinking plus intuition, that function kind of tries to make us more aware of what is behind the physics. So it's kind of the flip side, on the other side of quantum physics, which is what is the metaphysics, what is meta to the physics in our reality. That is kind of what TN actually tries to accomplish, in my opinion. Though in our culture, of course, we have we kind of, or almost everyone believes like the sensory reality is the real reality, right? The material reality. So most NT types also believe that, because that is kind of how we grow up and what we learn to believe in a way. But I think the thinking and intuition in itself tries to kind of transcend this idea, and it kind of tries to introduce there is this other dimension, which is the metaphysical dimension. Okay. So all there's many like NT theories that kind of tries to do this. It tries to give us a theory about why physics or time and space is not fundamental to reality, which is kind of what the INTJ Donald Hoffman did, right? And that is kind of very the NT goal, in a sense. Like NT in itself kind of wanna kind of stress that truth in a way. That's kind of what it is motivated to do. So yeah, yeah. So there's also this, and not only like understanding the metaphysical world, but when you have thinking plus intuition, you kind of have logic plus the creative part of us, which comes from metaphysics, right? The creative part is creating something out of nothing, essentially. Even logically, we have to say that reality exists, and existence can't come from non-existence. So if existence has to come from existence, it means that existence has always existed, right? So that is kind of it kind of says that something has to be something has to create what, like the something doesn't come out of nothing, so something has to be behind the creation in a way. Yeah. So, and that is kind of then we are onto the inventive mind, which we also can associate with the NT function, which is that it allows a person to have innovative ideas. It allows a person to create new creations in reality based on logic. So for example, a train is a creation like that didn't really exist before, but we have created it through innovative ideas and kind of thinking new and understanding logic. It's kind of this logic plus creativity union that kind of makes that possible. Yeah, and the thinking function is also as such that it cares a lot about geometry and fractal beauty in a way. And the NT personality also kind of attempts to think meta to the animal thinking brain. So when the NT person is thinking, they are trying to think in a way that is detached from the human experience and human ideas. Kind of, they try to detach themselves from these fantasy ideas that we can have as we have human perception in a way. So they always doubt their logic, or like they're more likely to doubt their logic. And since they are like to doubt their logic, they are more able to kind of go meta, like have a metacognition about what is actually logical. Are we what we are talking about now? Is it actually logical, or can we doubt it? If we can doubt it, it's not true, right? So an NT person will always kind of ask these more existential questions about, is it actually logical, or are we just assuming it? Because they don't take information like just seeing it or hearing it. It's not enough. They have to understand it like logically if it's actually like that. While the TS types is more like they more be probably more often fooled by what they think is true, but it's not true in a way. But they are also more aware of how does actually the game or reality that we find ourselves in work. How does it actually work? And that's a very practical way to use thinking or form awareness, because if you are very aware of how this reality functions, like you can basically find ways to do things that is very easy, because the components are already here. Like if you play, it's probably a bad example, but if you play Mario, for example, a Mario game, you know that you can just get this, you can jump on this box and get this mushroom, and then you get a big Mario. Rather than maybe if an NT person played the game, maybe he would try to grow his size in another way, when he could just use the game instead. He could just use the logic of the game to easily manifest that result in a way. And that's also why I think we see a lot of TS personalities in, for example, parkour and like tricksing with a bike and stuff like that, because I think they kind of almost kind of intuitively or instinctually knows how to navigate themselves like in the air. So for example, doing like these amazing tricks with a bicycle and stuff like in mid air is probably easier if you have a lot of both thinking awareness and sensory awareness, because it's like it kind of makes you master the game that you are playing in a way, if that makes sense. I hope it made sense. Okay, so so the thinking function is kind of, it tries to dissect like reality in a way and understand it through a logical system or framework, and then kind of comprehend it in the most accurate way to reality itself. That is kind of what thinking often wants to do. But again, you can also use it in a creative way. Like if you program a game, then you are using it in the creative way. So it's not like it's not about figuring out how things function, but more like how to make a logical framework to make something function in a certain way, kind of like the other way in a way. The function seeks truth precision regarding objects or geometry and mechanisms and systems. So it looks at everything that doesn't live in reality, which is just the structure of things, and it tries to understand what's going on. Okay, I already mentioned this, but like when this function cares for others, it's actually using kind of the feeling function, but because like in the feeling function we have the desire, the heart desire, which is where we know what we desire in a way. For example, taking care of others, like an act of love, essentially. That is kind of through the F function that they realize that it's so. So that they can use thinking to kind of know how to take care of people in the best way possible in regard to how reality functions or the structures of reality are functioning. So they kind of find solutions to mathematical and infrastructural obstacles through this thinking function. And basically, I basically said this earlier, it's the same thing. Especially TE, extroverted thinking, cares a lot about having this compatibility between different thinking or different objects or different systems. It kind of wants to bridge these systems in a way so they can be compatible with each other. That is kind of because that makes things more effective and and if we see it in the thinking dimension rather than the geometry dimension, you kind of have like also this idea of collaborating. You have to be, in order to be a collective mind that is kind of a larger size than just an individual, you have to have good communication between the brains, and that means one has to have kind of a logic that is possible to bridge to the other brains so they can understand each other and think as one brain in a sense, or one mind in a sense. So they care about improving ways to think, both in the individual sense or in the like how do we get to truth sense, or in the collective sense, how can we think improving how we are able to think together as one industry, for example, or society, for example. Yeah. So as I said, it's the blueprint behind mechanisms in reality, which actually it's always been kind of hard for thinkers to look at religion, because what is religion, right? So they have always been very like too skeptical to religion, and to kind of this like if some shaman kind of sits down and prays to the gods, and there's living ghosts around and like stuff like that, they were kind of looking at it and like, where is the mechanism in this? What is going on here? Because that they're like they don't know how to put that kind of thing, because the perception they have, which is about form and geometry, is very or less present in these kind of phenomena. So they are kind of like very skeptical to religion, and oftentimes they even deny religion and spirituality and all of these things just completely. Or they find an idea about this religion or religious ideas that kind of just sounds logical and geometry based. So, for example, you have this thinker called Descartes, René Descartes or something. And basically, the guy who said, "I think, therefore I am," and he actually wanted to prove God logically, and he kind of did that kind of well. But the God he kind of defined it was kind of it was just suggested more that the universe is a big machine in a way, and it's a logical process, just kind of it's a like it was more of it was more of a saying there is a source that created everything, and it's logical in a way. That's kind of his perception, right? But he never went into this. But this God or creator is also concerned with your emotions and your answers your prayers, or can witness you and love you and stuff like that. It was none of that. It was actually as if he wanted to define God in this bubble of thinking or geometry alone, and because that's what he was confident and competent at. So he had to in his mind that was a way to know that God was real in a way. But the God he found was not like how a feeler personality would kind of personally relate to God usually, like, because a feeler would be more likely to look at God and divinity as something personal and living, essentially something that kind of watches over you like a mother in a way. And so that is a very, very like distinct interesting point. And yeah, so what I'm trying to get at is like, I think your personality is very like, if they see religion, is like what is that, or is no, or they can see science, which is kind of the counter movement to religion in a way, and they will be, yes, science is very, very, it's exactly what we are looking for, and exactly what they can see with their perception, with their thinking perception. It's what they are aware of, is the science of the reality. So I actually directly correlate the feeling function to religion and the thinking function to science. And the science people or the thinking people will be very likely to be against religion in a way. Oftentimes because these feeler people or feeler movement is usually not as great in science. So it's kind of this. It looks like there is a war, but there is not a war. It's just two perceptions that can see different things, and they didn't collaborate. So when these two perceptions are able to collaborate, they are able to find much more of the realer idea or better idea of reality in a way. And that is also apparent in Heart Math Institute, where you have the brain-heart coherence. So you have the brain or thinking kind of that dimension cooperating with the feeling dimension in the heart, and kind of making this new it's a connection. So it results in a new chemistry and a new kind of state of being. Basically, it's basically a sort of awakening. Yeah, to feel in and being able to feel in love with reality. Yeah. So thinking likes to define things. They want things to be clear and distinct. That is very, very, very attractive to a thinking person, to see something that is clear and distinct, because then they know how it works. If it's not clear and not distinct, they don't necessarily know how it works, right? And the religion and spirituality is essentially that. It's not clear and distinct. It's more like a fluffy ball of magic and love and epicness, if that makes sense. Like it's not clear and distinct and logical. It's more like, but we can use logic itself to kind of illustrate this. So there's some geometry. There's angles in the geometry, right? You have the, for example, a star. You have all the angles in the star, and you can define all the angles can be defined, and you can see how it's logically and structurally relates to the rest of the geometry, right? While when you have a circle, or maybe more accurately a flower of life type of geometry, or a circle, there is no defined point in that geometry, and that is kind of how we can kind of see feeling a little bit like that. So thinking can more easily logically understand feeling, because it's like, since there is no reference to define very easily in that domain, it will be very hard to understand it with logic. You gotta instead understand it with a sense of existential emotion and self-expression, and that is kind of how you have to understand the feeling function. You have to understand it through something else than logic, though they can kind of bridge into each other. So it's not that they are completely separate in a way. They are actually the same thing, I think. But it's like, you can see it more like a spectrum, right? Between the clearly definable logic and the undefinable kind of a personal essence that we are, in a way. Yeah, but the thinking function in itself, if we only use the thinking function to kind of understand something, it prefers it to be completely non-poetic and non-personal, no feelings involved in the process. It's kind of like science. You don't really want too much feelings involved in it. At least that is the common idea about how it should work. Okay. So here is the introverted thinking function, which is one of two functions in thinking, and I've been calling it neural precision. And the word neural means relating to a nerve or the nervous system. So what my point is about that is, because TI kind of have this, it kind of needs a sort of base logic or base kind of a ground or a solid reference for their logical system. So there is a defined point within the system that they can relate back to all the time in order to kind of logically decide if that is logical or not. And that's kind of usually why you see thinking or TI persons kind of like to study an object, for example, and just, for example, studying the brain, for example, and then how does this brain work in relation to itself in a way. And they can also do it in a larger context. For example, Descartes, when he wanted to find the essence of God, or if God exists, essentially, he did that because he needed that fundamental groundwork, right, for his understanding of reality. So he needed to understand if God was real or not real, in order for him to have more logical conclusions about everything else. That's kind of how I see that motivation that he had, and he did find something that was very remarkable in my opinion, which is why it was kind of funny, because he was an INTP, and there's a lot of other INTPs who loved this idea so much because it felt very accurate to them. So, for example, Albert Einstein was one of those people who kind of also was like, yeah, that is totally it. But in my opinion, again, they didn't really find the God or existence, so to speak. They found instead they found kind of the God of thinking in a way. They found the essence of thinking, or that function. That is in reality what actually they found, which is just, in my opinion, just one aspect of four aspects, which is thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensing. So, and actually they yeah, just to say that he talks a lot about both sensing and intuition in his theory, but he never mentioned feeling. Like he wanted to know if, because he saw like there was logic in the sensory world, like does matter have thoughts and stuff like that. That's kind of the questions he asked, or these people, these INTPs who were onto that idea, like maybe not Spinoza, but yeah, I don't remember their names. Albert Einstein, for example. Yeah. But again, my opinion is that all of these, it's like they ignored feeling. They had like often like OPS calls it, or the typology called objective personality system. They called like if you're a thinker hero, you have a feeler delusion. That's kind of, and there's a point to that, because if you are a thinker hero, you are very likely to end up with this kind of conclusion that everything is made of logic and geometry and is logical in the base. While if you are a feeler personality, you will, like feeler hero, I mean, you will be more likely to be, oh no, God is not logical at all, it's just the living essence, right? So it's kind of this, it can be like this kind of delusion in relationship with the inferior function in a way. Okay, but that what is good about it is, like, if you have thinking as your hero function, I think it means you are very accurate within that dimension. So I just wanted to say that because OPS wanted to say kind of, if you are feeling in the second or third stack, you have a better understanding of feeling. But I think if you have feeling as hero function, it's not that you have a like your understanding of feeling might be better in itself, like in its own dimension, but your understanding between feeling and thinking, like the kind of connected dimension between the two, that's something you are probably not as good in. That's more for the those who are feeling and thinking in the middle stacks. Yeah. Okay, so a neuron is an individual structure within a network, and that is kind of I'm kind of back to the idea again that TI likes to start with a neuron in in a network, and then understand the network around the neuron because it relies on that one neuron in a sense. So it's kind of, you can see it more like the mother neuron or something like that, and all the other structures relate to the truth of that point of reference. Yeah, and that's kind of the downside with TI is kind of it can be too much located located like in one part of a system. So, for example, if a TI person study the brain, for example, as an organ, they may kind of miss out on the fact that the brain is not only the brain, but also like the spine and the arms and the body language and the organs in the body is also kind of, they can't really be separate from the brain as an organ. So it's kind of, you have this paradox where the brain is separate from the other organs, but it's also not separate because it's also the same organ as, like, you don't really have a brain without all the rest of the uh, structures and functionalities in a way. And you can probably even extend that even further than the body. If we have an electromagnetic field, for example, around our body, then suddenly the brain is not only connected to this body, but also to the whole reality in itself. If we assume that reality is made of something like electromagnetism, for example. So that's kind of it kind of shows this um, another way to think about logic, like to not, because we can make logical conclusions, but without the whole picture, it might not be the best conclusion. Okay, so TI plus intuition is the capacity to consciously think own thought, consciously think own thought forms rather than observe them. And what I'm meaning by that is, like, if you have TI plus plus sensing, you have the capacity to see the forms and logic in the reality that we are in. But if you have TI plus intuition, you have the capacity to actually think thought forms. Like, you are the thinker rather than what is thinking. So you are the creator of the thoughts with the TI plus N. Basically, I guess it kind of ties into free will, actually. So you have the ability to think your own thought forms, which is free will, rather than being thinking by a reality, which is determinism, right? You have like the philosophy of determinism, where everything is predetermined, and you have the philosophy of indeterminism, where everything is subject to not be as we predicted, right? And that's basically free will versus no free will. And in my opinion, if you watched my video on intuition and sensing, that is basically what I'm saying, that intuition is actually the capacity to free will in a way, while sensing is the predetermined future, like the predetermined reality. So like your habitual personality, for example, if you don't change your habitual personality, you will have a predetermined reality that comes like in your ways, like sitting back in like not driving the car on your own, but sitting in the seat behind and just absorbing what happens to your car or your personality and your experience. That's kind of yeah. And sensing kind of allows you to see what is in the habitual personality or habitual reality for that instance, with accuracy. So it's kind of because if you don't have sensing perception, you won't understand how reality or the virtual reality actually works, and it will cause you problems because how can you play a Mario game if you don't know how to feed yourself with a mushroom, for example, or yeah. So it's kind of just to not forget that, and yeah, the intuition world in Kataronics is more like it's actually the conscious mind in a way. It's when you are not so focused into some sort of automatic reality, but you are more zoomed out, like when you meditate, for example, and you dream or stuff like that, that you are more like, or maybe dreaming is not the best example actually, but if you meditate, or kind of the ability to detach yourself from what is automatically and subconsciously happening, you can view it from the outside, and you can kind of realize that you are more like a blank canvas in that dimension where you have free will to draw what you want to draw. So kind of the intuition dimension with thinking is kind of you kind of draw your future with thoughts. So maybe you have a goal to become a doctor. Maybe I'm just trying to be an anti person now, and like you can draw a logical you can draw yourself as a doctor and see how you logically can get there by understanding how logic works in a way, and then you can apply it to the sensory part of your personality, which is of course not a canvas because you are human and you have a habitual personality and a story you are living and have lived. So that is kind of applying that other personality that you are drawing on the canvas onto the personality that you are playing in the game, and then you you design your own character, right, in a sense, if you do it properly, and then you are a doctor, and you made that happen through free will, by applying that new idea that you have drawn on the canvas onto the habitual self, by repeating the focus of and logic of becoming that doctor. Yeah, and that is by the way also called fake it till you make it, which is you can watch the intuition video on this if you want. Okay, so the other function, TE, or what I'm calling infrastructural precision, or actually interstructure. I actually changed it I changed it when I made the presentation because that made more logical sense. So I thought it was okay to change my definition there. But it's basically it's the extroverted thinking function, and the interstructure means like there's a large structure of collaborative individual references. So you have all the individual points of reference. For example, in this picture that we see in the presentation, you have all of these like individual spots, and you can kind of see how they connect with all of the other spots. And this connection is like this network that results out of that connection is kind of what TE has awareness of the logic between logic, you can say, or the thoughts between thoughts, all like yeah. So it's defined by like that there's a like distinct precision, but it's very chaotic. Like the precision that TE is looking for is more chaotic than the TI function, because you have a bigger structure, with more points of reference, and they kind of want to see all of them at once, essentially. Yeah, so for example, an organism is a collective structure between organs or different points of reference. That's kind of not exactly the same, but you can think about that in the same way. Like I said earlier, maybe the TI could like be hyper focused on defining what is a brain and kind of have a very good idea of what a brain is. But the TE person could use the same like amount of time to also come with good conclusions, not because they are super good at what the brain does. Maybe not that they don't have the rich image of what the brain is and what it does, but since they also have the a correct precise idea about the other organs, and kind of understands how these things works together to create this brain or this body, they can actually have a very good understanding of the brain and the body that doesn't happen for the TI person, because they have like another way to find the logic. So they can kind of, I just try to say that TE and TI are both useful, and that they can even kind of be maybe more open to each other, like understand that they have this different way to find data and information, and that both are rather reliable and robust in their truth seeking of these mechanisms. It's just that they kind of miss out on truths that the other miss out on. Yeah, like it's kind of if they work together, they will kind of find more of the real truth, is my point. More easily, at least. So TE in human psychology is not. Yeah, TE in human psychology. Okay, so they are not cut off from a system or infrastructure, but that's the ultimate T. Is like the ultimate T is how does everything connect in kind of, let's see, the whole universe, or the whole existence is a better word. How does everything connect in the whole existence? And that is the super TE, which of course no human TE person ever will reach. But like that is kind of the ultimate goal to TE as a function, is how does everything work together. Yeah. Yeah, but the problem with the TE is that it doesn't. Actually, what I said is actually the ultimate goal to both TE and TI when I think about it. And yeah, you have TE plus intuition is the capacity to consciously think collective thought forms rather than just observe them. And what I'm trying to say there is that it's basically the same as TI plus NI in this sense, but that we can think as a collective mind, or a collective being, or a collective brain. We can think new things into the reality by cooperating the thinking in the intuitive sense. So that is also possible. It's kind of like if you have feeling instead, like feeling plus intuition, you have more like maybe a cultural self-expression where a large culture is expressing herself as a collective through being a culture, right? How does the culture express itself? Yeah. Okay, so TE is kind of the hive mind or groupthink in the conscious sense, like in the conscious thinking domain of the thinking or geometry function. TE is the hive mind or the groupthink mind, which is often we have like negative connotation with that sort of thing, but this is actually it can be both positive and negative in the way that we have we can have good collective ways to groupthink and we can have bad ways to collectively groupthink. So TE is kind of the collaborative nature of thinking. So when we are thinking, we are usually influencing other people to think, uh, may influencing them to maybe think in the same way or in a similar way, or maybe they are able to disregard it. For example, I think TI people is very they are very good at disregarding other people's thinking, both when the thinking is of low quality and also if the thinking is of high quality. So it's kind of the introverted thinker can be stuck in their own thinking for both better and worse, essentially. Um, yeah, and TE plus the sensing function is kind of makes up the interacting mechanisms in existence or in the logical geometrical part of existence. So this is no longer thinking in a way. It's more like objects relating to each other in a logical fashion. Maybe someone can call that thinking, but in this case, thinking is more like if there is a consciousness doing thinking, basically something that thinks consciously is more my definition of thinking than but actually it's kind of thinking too. Like if you have a person who is totally unconscious of how he thinks, he is still thinking, right? So you could say that unconscious thinking processes can also be thinking in a sense. It's like automatic habitual thinking, and we could say maybe that the reality that we know as time and space and all of these things are also the universe thinking in a habitual sense, in unconscious and habitual sense, like just thinks or functions the way it always functions in because it's a habit. It's a habitual thinking that births itself, like it births its own thought again and again and again, and it's more or less identical all the time. So that is kind of how I can look at that. I don't really have many good references actually for this function in like because I didn't really study a lot of logical stuff in this life. So, but I think I can think of one thing like you have this. I think the speed of light, for instance, has been shown. Like we usually think that the speed of light is just one constant speed kind of thing, but I think they discovered that the speed of light is actually not the same all the time. It's more like it's been stable in the uh, last decades or something. Yeah, I don't really know about it, but like that I remember that was one of those things that were like, oh, maybe the speed of light is not as fixed as we think, but it's more a habitual mechanism in a sense. You can probably try to look it up if you want. It's I think it was this guy. What is it called? Not. Yeah, actually, I don't know who talked about it, but check it out. Like, is the speed of light constant, or are we or is it not like that? Because there have been like measuring, they measure this every year, and it in the past it was like they measured different all the time. It's more like recently we have measured the same speed or something like that. Don't take my word for it. Maybe it was just some weird stuff. So, yeah. But I tried to find an example. Okay, and TE plus sensing in human psychology is the ability to observe interacting mechanism in time and space. So it's kind of, if you have high sensing perception, if you're a sensor personality, you can easily or more easily kind of instinctually just know how this reality works, because you have the perception to see it. How does this the mechanisms here, like on the surface reality, truly work? Yeah, and this is a thing I've heard a lot of by a lot of people who are TE, is that like to have X, you can spend time with people who have X. So it's kind of like if you want to, let's say, if you want to be rich or something like that, or good, yeah, like something like that, then to spend time with other people who are also rich will kind of can help the TE person to kind of adapt the same thinking patterns as that rich person, and then he can more easily become rich. Maybe that was a bad example, but like I've seen a lot of NTJs especially kind of have that idea. So they kind of just absorb. If they want to reach a vision, they kind of absorb how does the people that already made it, that already were successful in that field, how are they thinking, and how can I adapt my thinking to be similar to that person, and how he thinks. Yeah, and kind of a form of a super TE is kind of, you can see the galaxies kind of, this is like this super TE structure of possible connections to make between all of the different components, like Milky Way and solar systems and like black holes, and all of these phenomena that we can find in space is kind of maybe a good idea to see very like TE in a very large way, like it wants to understand how everything functions together as one thing. Yeah, which kind of reminds of this picture on the presentation. Yeah, so the existential purpose of TI and TE is essentially kind of been talking about it already, but like understanding the components within a game or sensory reality, ST, to basically reverse engineering that reality in the logical fashion, or understanding structure beyond game or sensory reality, which is especially true for Ni plus T, kind of like understanding the logic that made the virtual reality rather than the logic within the virtual reality in itself. Yeah, I also think that TI and TE is kind of exists in order to create a game or sensory reality. So I think kind of, let's say, Divinity wanted to create these different games that we can play and have fun and discover what we like and have experiences and so forth. I think that is thinking or logos is kind of the reason why it exists is because then we can create these realities just an idea, really. Just trying to understand why does thinking exist. And yeah, and I also think that, like, if you have a soul and a spirit, I think the thinking function is, in a sense, the capacity the soul and the spirit or Holy Spirit has to manifest in a way. It's the capacity it has to manifest, because they can think a thought and then it can appear right in front of them, and kind of that is kind of maybe thinking is essentially the tool we need in order to create something. So and since we are creative beings, we need thinking in order to create. And as I said, also that we create these experiences for ourselves through making this logical framework for how this reality will exist. For example, the reality of time and space might be essentially an artificial structure that divinity made on purpose, so that it could experience itself through a reality like that. And this is just suggestions, of course. Probably most thinking and geometry persons would probably be more likely to say that this thinking exists because it has to exist in a way. It's kind of like how Descartes talked about God, that God doesn't really do anything other than existing, and he doesn't have a choice because he just exists, and when he exists, all of these things happens as a result of that. That's kind of maybe what the logical thinking geometry person would say is the existential purpose, that there is no purpose. There is just it's just like that in a way. That's maybe what a lot of those would have said. Yeah. Okay, that's the thinking function. So we are going to we can take a fast look on this, though it will be the next video, and it's basically a logical overview over the Kataronics model. So it's kind of maybe handy to include in this thinking video. That's I kind of mapped these different functions into different ideas, and as you probably understand, it's not common ideas. But like, I see the ST as the world, or the like most obvious physical reality that we can see, and like what we usually call reality is basically the ST world, or ST. While in my opinion, the soul is like, it's kind of the implicit part of reality, as opposed to the world, which is the explicit part of reality that is kind of obvious to us. But the soul part of reality is the least obvious, and in my opinion, it's the NF, the idealism kind of world, where creation and the fantasy is essentially kind of real, while the NT part of reality is the mind, the kind of the capacity to think and create and make forms, and essentially create this geometry matrix that kind of makes up an experience or a reality, or a dimension of existence. And the SF function essentially is the like experiential part of existence, or reality, which is yeah, it kind of accounts for life, because what's a life without emotions? Like, to have a story to go through kind of requires you to have an emotional experience, which we call life. and that's kind of the experience of a movie and so forth. That's kind of what it is. You have these senses that you experience something with. You experience something with the senses, and you have a feeling as a result of that. And that's kind of what I correlate to the SF function. And then you have kind of the kind of components between these again, which is actually the more pure functions. So I call essentially soul. Well, it's not completely. Yeah, it's not completely like the soul and the mind. Yeah, the soul and mind together, they make super conscious creation, which is basically kind of intuition. So the super conscious creation is where it's where new ideas. Actually, I'll go more into this on the next video, but super conscious creation is basically intuition, where is ideas and new realities and creations are coming from. Somebody would even say that intuition is God in a way, the creator of something, while the subconscious habituation is the sensory world, or sensory worlds if we consider a multiverse or more realities being present. And the geometry matrix is basically thinking, and the heartfelt identification with the experience and the soul and like just the living essence of reality is kind of feeling. Yeah, it's feeling. So this is is the living essence in reality, both as soul and virtual personalities in a way. So that's kind of what feeling makes up in Kataronics, and I just hope that kind of made more sense with everything I've been explaining more, because this in the end this is geometry too. Like there is a logical counterpart, and there is a logic behind it in a sense. Yeah, and I hope that was clear enough. I'm going to talk more about that in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed the video on the thinking, despite my rather unusual ideas about what thinking is, which is that thinking is not only logic but also the geometry or form, or like it's kind of conscious thinking and unconscious thinking, and the unconscious thinking is basically matter and form in a sense, or relating to matter, I should say. Logic relating to matter and space and time and physics and so forth. So yeah, I hope that was interesting, and I'll see you in the next video.